This is live.
Hi, everyone. My name is Yogesh Chavda. I'm the founder of Y2S Consulting, and we work on helping brands operate in stigmatized industries. And more recently, we've been talking a lot about AI and marketing as well. Today, we are very fortunate to have Charlene Zappa join us as a CMO and as a VP of marketing from some really well known and well recognized brands and companies. So, without further ado, I'd love to have Charlene introduce herself and welcome, Charlene.
Thank you, Yogesh. I'm excited. Hi, everyone. I'm Charlene. I am a complete and utter brand nerd. I've been fortunate enough to work for several decades at Procter& Gamble, mostly in beauty. I've worked at the J.M. Smucker company and also most recently at the Fiskars company where I was the CMO and EVP. And it was most recently where I learned and got really into AI when I took a course at Northwestern this past
Mhm.
fall. So I am not an expert in AI, I will say, but I'm really excited to have the conversation.
Well, the good news, Charlene, is that nobody's really an expert in AI right now. So we're all having a very steep learning curve. So
Exactly.
anybody who's got any experience that's relevant and use cases that can help, that's always beneficial for everyone. So why don't we get
Exactly.
started first by talking about how have you approached this whole conversation around AI as a leader of a marketing function? You obviously recognize the value of all the different operational units within marketing. How did you view AI and how did you start thinking about bringing AI into the fold, so to speak?
Mm. I'm glad you ask it that way because many times I'm starting to hear the question, what is your AI strategy? And I think
Hmm.
that's the wrong question. I think the right question is, what's your marketing strategy? What's your business strategy? And then can AI enable it somehow? So, big believer in strategy first. And when you think about AI in marketing in particular, I think the simplest way is to think of the purchase funnel:
Hmm.
awareness, consideration, and purchase. Excuse me. Sorry about that. And
Yeah.
really think about where are the problems that you're trying to solve along that purchase funnel. Is
Hmm.
it awareness? Is it consideration? Is it purchase or loyalty? And from there, you can start to think about where you want your AI to be pointed.
Hmm.
However, very, very importantly, a step that I think a lot of companies are starting to miss is once you know the problems you want to solve, you really have to think about what data you have or what data you can get. And I just read an article about Mercado Libre, for example, which is the largest e commerce and fintech company in Latin America. They took 2 years without innovation so they can clean up their data. And they had
Hmm.
to do that so that now they're ready and able to use AI. So don't think that step is small. That step on data readiness is often the biggest one to overcome. But again, objectives and strategies, kind of what problems are you solving? Where can AI help? And then do
Hmm.
you have the data or can you get the data to bring it to life?
So you brought up a really important point, right, around data and data quality, right? And I think a lot of companies, and especially CMOs, they kind of like throw their arms up in the air and say, "Oh my gosh, like cleaning up the data. Oh my gosh, how long will it take, and what's the degree of at what point do we call it and say, it's good enough for us to start something? Do you have a sense for that at all?"
For sure. I have a gut anyway. Number
Yeah.
one, I think it is upon the CMO and the C-suite
Hmm.
to be most accountable for the data. That's their job. Stewardship, even the board, honestly. Do
Hmm.
not delegate that. That's like my biggest advice to my fellow CMOs. It is on us to be able to look in the eye and make sure that it has the proper privacy and controls and protection and verification, etc. But that doesn't mean you need to be perfect before you can do use cases. And I think that's the advice that I continue to read and see is, again, once you know what problems you're trying to solve, what are
Hmm.
the use cases that kind of fit under there just to get started and just start to learn while
Yeah.
you're securing up your data and making sure that all of your stewardship is up to par. So for sure, don't wait for perfection. Progress is important, but be involved. Don't delegate your authority or your accountability.
Absolutely, and that makes complete sense, right? And oftentimes, at least in my experience, what I found is that when you start on some of the use cases, and we'll talk about those in a minute, um, you'll start identifying where the knowledge, where the data gaps are, or how clean the data really is, and that becomes part of the process of also data cleanup because you're actually getting into the use case, right? So
Absolutely.
sometimes people put the data issue in front of everything else, and they don't start anything.
Mhm.
My recommendation, and I think you're agreeing, is that start and you'll clean along the way, kind of thing too,
Yes,
right? So um,
exactly. Absolutely.
so tell me about, let's talk about frameworks and use cases. So how have you thought about approaching this? You already talked about the fact that there's a marketing strategy. You want to see how AI fits into that strategy. So let's talk about that. Give us a sense of how would you go about doing that.
Absolutely. So, largely speaking, and again, I'm not the expert, I'm still a student, but largely speaking, when you think about marketing, you first want to figure out what landscape you're working in. Then you
Mhm.
figure out who are you targeting, what do you stand for, and how do you want to execute. AI
Yeah.
can help everywhere. So, landscape alone, the business intelligence that AI enables is mind blowing and super exciting. So, that's one area that I would absolutely start to learn in because often with business analysis and landscape analysis, you're looking at external data, not internal, right? So, that's
Mhm.
one where privacy should not be an issue. So,
Yeah.
landscape and business intelligence is huge. But then when you get to who are you targeting, very excited to see a number of insight companies go there where you can do qualitative or quantitative data in a matter of minutes, if not hour maybe, in what used to take a day. Excuse me, it was what used to take months. So the
Mhm.
who understanding, your consumer understanding, is much
Mhm.
faster and robust. I think we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment.
Mhm.
We all know that there's a lot of content generation, and that gets into your how. What's
Mhm.
exciting to see there is it's not just static images, but it's increasingly video, it's increasingly personalized and hyper personalized. So when
Mhm.
you look across the value chain of marketing, again, there are tools for every single stage. You just need to look at what is your top priority, what's the highest leverage item that's going to add the most value to your business, and that's where I would start.
Amazing. So when you talk about the who, right, you're talking about target audiences and having data for that. So sometimes you have first party data, right? Companies like
Yes,
Spotify or Pinterest or any of these social media companies, they have a lot of first party data. E-commerce companies have
yes,
first party data. But what about companies that
absolutely.
don't have first party data? What would you suggest for them?
I think it's the same. This is AI gives those companies a chance to step change their data strategy and their data availability.
Hmm.
A lot of brands don't have the DTC companies that they wish they had,
Mm.
right? And so this is
Yeah.
a chance to really start to learn because with AI, you can accelerate your data acquisition,
Mm.
which I think it is exactly the point. We were talking about consumer journey maps, for
Yeah.
example, in consumer segmentations. That was one of your questions you and I were talking about.
Yeah.
And what's exciting is AI can help with both of those. But what I think is incredibly cool about AI is when you think of the old consumer segmentations or the old journey maps, they were
Hmm.
slow, they were static in one point in time, they were
Hmm.
largely expensive, and they were very general, a kind of a high level. Whereas with AI, those same consumer segmentations and journey maps are not static, they're real time, they're not general and high level, they're hyper personalized, and
Right.
they are dynamic. Increasingly, AI is going from telling you about the past to predicting the future. And that to me is like a marketer's dream. So whether you have first party data or not doesn't matter in those instances. There are tools and platforms right now that you can use to go after that.
Lovely. I love that. I love that point you're making because it just shows that today with the suite of products that's available from an AI perspective, and especially with generative AI in particular, you can actually use that those kinds of tools like ChatGPT or even create personalized GPTs to help you create a segmentation model if you wanted to. So I
Absolutely.
think I was showing you one of those examples just the other day, in fact, if I'm not mistaken.
Exactly. Yes, you've
right?
done some amazing GPTs on just that. So absolutely, I recommend those listeners to check out Yogesh's. I think you've launched 3 or 4 tools now
Yeah.
that are really helping in brand strategy, in brand claims, and then what was the third? Brand segmentation,
Yeah, it
maybe?
was actually the segmentation and also the innovation pipeline development as well. So,
Yes, that's
so no,
right.
thank you for sharing that. But coming back to your framework, so you talked about the landscape assessment and the business intelligence. You talked about the who. How about the what and the how? Just give us some examples of how you're thinking about that.
Absolutely. So the what, in other words, of what do you want your brand to stand for?
Yeah.
Increasingly, what can help with the what is brand guidelines, brand equity guidelines, brand identity guidelines. Used to
Mm,
take months to design, and again, there are tools that you can do that instantly. Your brand strategy and your creative briefs. There's a tool, for example, called Briefly. I don't have personal experience, but I read that many Fortune 500 companies are using Briefly that drives your creative brief instantly with insights. It's not just filling out a template, but it's
mm,
mining insights about your target and about the consumer you're trying to do against the objective and the strategy that you have to create a really robust creative brief for your agency. I am a huge believer in strategy. As I said, so many creative briefs are bad. They're just lazy, and we fill out a template, and I'm guilty as charged. If we can get to true, rich creative briefs, even if it's AI generated, it's going to help us to get much better advertising and marketing in the end. So, lots of things in the what area. And then when we get to the how area, this is super exciting. Of course, there are PDPs and that you can update using AI. Spotify just today launched where they're doing image creation that makes these small business owners look like they have professionally produced product images for their Spotify platforms. That's super exciting.
wow.
Um, However, what I think is the big question is, can AI create ads? And that,
Mm,
many forums I've been in, that has been the question. It's been certainly one of my questions. I was really
mm,
skeptical on whether this is true because, to me, great creative, great ads evokes emotion.
mhm.
And we have to remember AI does not think and it does not feel.
Yes.
However, I did
Yeah.
just read of a case where we're all familiar with System One and the way that they quantify ads. There's a brand out of the UK that Mars just purchased a couple weeks ago, in fact, called Hotel Chocolat.
Okay.
And they created an AI generated ad that, through System Ones, it scored their highest score of 5.9. And it was in
Wow.
the top 0.3% of all ads System One has tested globally. And
Oh,
if you
wow.
go just go to YouTube, search Hotel Chocolat AI ad or System One ad, and you'll see it. It's pretty good, I have to say. So I'm being taught every day that even some of the more cerebral things that we do, like strategy, like creative, AI
Mhm.
can assist. I would never say they could replace us, but it certainly can assist.
You brought up an interesting point, and I'll certainly go back and check out the Hotel Chocolat example that you just gave. But yeah, AI can't have feelings and emotions. You're totally right. At least today, we don't know how things will be a year or 5 years down the road, right?
Correct.
But what AI can do is it can enable creative teams and brand marketeers to think more, let's say, out of the box than within the box, if you wanted
Yes.
to, right? I know it's such a overused term, thinking outside the box, but the reality is that in most companies and with most brands, we all get into this tunnel vision, like we know our consumer, we know our category, and we think in that context. But I feel like AI does us actually a service in helping us break out of that tunnel vision, if you want to call it that. What are your thoughts on that?
I do, because done well, it's going to improve our external lens, meaning more about our consumer, more about our
Yeah,
competition, more about trends, and all of this is going to be much more at our fingertips. I saw there was a question about smaller companies.
yeah,
Increasingly, I think AI is going to be the great equalizer, because it's, especially as long as they stay open sourced,
yeah.
they're, whether you're Procter and Gamble or you're Charlene and company,
Yeah.
the same tools are available at our fingertips. So I do think it's going to broaden our lenses if we have the discipline to continue to be curious and to learn, and that's the big challenge.
Yeah, well said, well said. Because you're right. I do feel like this is a massive like game changer because it's leveling the playing field between the big behemoths like Unilever, Procter and Gamble, L'Oreal, etc. With the smaller players, you could, as a smaller player, do all the same things that these bigger companies do through
Agreed.
tools like AI. So long as you have
Agreed.
the right data, so long as you are not getting hallucinations and things like that, I would imagine, right? So
Exactly. The big watch out. Absolutely.
So let's keep going. Like you started talking about hotel chocolate. What other examples or use cases have you come across that have really
Mm.
got you thinking differently as a CMO?
Yeah, you mentioned L'Oreal, and I've been a long admirer of L'Oreal for years and years. CES last month in Las
Mhm.
Vegas, L'Oreal introduced a number of new tools. One of which is taking their beauty advisor a step further and really hyper personalizing their beauty recommendations using AI, which I think is very exciting for those in the beauty industry. Um, just this week, Etsy has introduced a gift giving AI. It's a personalized gift giving AI tool.
Okay.
So Etsy knows that many of us buy gifts on Etsy, and you can put in many different prompts like, oh, it's for a male who's X years old and is a sportsman and loves the color blue. And it will come back with personalized gift giving recommendations. I think that's really exciting and something to think about for consumer products companies, right? Is how could we
Mhm.
take that Etsy model and start to hyper personalize our recommendations?
Huh. That is fascinating. Um, so with these kinds of examples, personalization is a big space, right? Engagement is another one. It seems like as well, based on what you're describing. Um, what about let's say more mature brands like Levi's, for example? If I was just to pick on that one as an example, what would you have to say
Yes.
about them?
Yeah, so I'm a big admirer of Levi's. They're very innovative and very courageous. And
Mhm.
you may remember last spring, they came
Yeah.
out with AI generated models. And they
Oh.
had a kind of side by side that said, which one can you tell which one is AI generated, which I thought was brilliant. What's interesting and the watch out for us as marketers is they got a lot of backlash from that, where people thought
Mm.
they were lazy. You're not actually spending time to produce real models. Or worse, they thought that Levi's was being racist, even.
Huh.
And so there is ways to learn about things like that on a smaller base size, where you could get perhaps some consumer validation and understanding before you go big and you go broad. And
Mhm.
as we were talking about those use cases,
Mhm.
it's so important to do use cases, in a smaller scale and learn what is consumer reaction, what is consumer interpretation,
Mhm.
what are the risks versus the rewards before you go broad and you grow loud. The other brand that I love that's doing some really cool stuff, and they've been out in the forefront, is Harley Davidson, a
Mm.
wonderful brand. And they started using AI back in 2017. And you may remember the tool Albert.
Yeah.
It got a lot of press back in the day.
Yeah.
Harley Davidson, it's everything from, again, what bike is right for you, when do you need to service your bike, what potential accessories go with your bike,
Mhm.
inventory management for the suppliers of Harley Davidson. And
Mhm.
as a marketer, I will say any inventory management tool is a good tool, because all of us went through the post-COVID inventory crisis, where either our retailers were not ordering more because they had too much inventory, or many of
Yeah.
our companies were cash crunched because our inventory got too high. So it's not just on the demand side that AI can help, it's also on the supply side with things like inventory prediction and inventory management.
That's a great example. And quite frankly, I think there's a question actually coming through from a LinkedIn user where they're asking, what about B2B brands? And I think the what you're describing actually applies to both B2C and to B2B, I would imagine, correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. Lavazza is both a B2B and a B2C company, Lavazza Coffee.
Yep.
in their vending machines. I loved this one. They were doing a predictive inventory management tool that was
Mhm.
using everything from consumer behavior to moon cycles, believe it or not, like the cycle of the moon, to
Wow.
help them predict inventory. I don't know what the cycle of the moon has to do with coffee consumption, but apparently something. Lavazza
Right.
knows. And I think inventory, HR, there are incredible tools on the entire, from talent acquisition to talent training, talent onboarding, that
Mhm.
B2B can help. There are a number of different ways that AI can help us, not just on B2C.
Got it. So Charlene, you've talked about use cases, you've talked about the framework in terms of the marketing strategy, but as a leader within an organization, being part of the C-suite, right? Ultimately, all the decisions come, from a marketing perspective, come to you, and then you have to obviously work with your peers in the C-suite, and the CEO of the company to make, pretty big investments and decisions at the end of the day, right? So do you see AI helping you, enable with better decision making, or do you feel like that's still a bridge too far at this stage? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's an incredible decision-making enabler if
Hmm.
you make sure that you validate the accuracy and you take out the hallucinations, you take out the biases, because those are very, very real. There was a HBR article in July, August of last summer, and they had the 5 Ps of data stewardship. I'm actually going to look
Hmm.
them up so that I get them right. It was a great, great, great article.
Yeah.
And it was this, the first P is provenance. Do you know where the data came from and how it was obtained? That's critically
Hmm.
important, because if you don't have the consumer's permission to use the data, it's illegal.
Hmm.
Secondly, was the purpose. Is the purpose you're using the data for consistent with its original purpose? If not, you're not able to use it. Third was
Hmm.
protection. How is the data being protected, and who will destroy it and when? Fourth P was privacy. How is the PII being protected, and how is the data being anonymized? I can never say that word. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, and then the last one is preparation. How is it cleaned? How is the accuracy being verified? Because we all know garbage in, garbage out. And yes, the data can help in decision making, but if those 5 Ps are not withheld,
Hmm.
it's garbage in, garbage out, and you'll have garbage decisions. Not to mention you're risking your brand and you're risking your relationship with your consumers.
Right. That's a phenomenal framework, and I think it's a great tip for all CMOs to be thinking about, because if you get that part right, and you obviously have to collaborate with your IT function,
Yes.
maybe your supply chain function as well, to make sure that you're thinking through all those kinds of questions, and creating a team or a task force that has very clear like objectives and KPIs associated with this, so that they're
Yes,
held accountable to doing the right thing as well. I would imagine,
exactly.
right? Yeah.
KPIs, yes, measuring what is success, defining what is success, right? Even in your
Mhm.
use cases, I think is critically important, and then making sure you track the KPIs, absolutely. And by the way, it's so fun
Yeah.
to see so many familiar names. So hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. It's exciting. It's like a reunion. Thank you guys for giving us your time.
Well, you got a big fan following already, so that's amazing. So
It's us, and it's the topic. It's such a great topic.
exactly. So you mentioned a couple of times now. So I want to do a little bit of a deeper dive, a little bit around. You mentioned the word hyper personalization, right?
Mm.
So can you give an example or two that really speaks to what you mean by hyper personalization?
Yeah. So yes, yesterday, for example, I listened in through the CMO Alliance. They had a great speaker on how ad buying is being generated or
Mhm.
driven by AI. So we're
Yeah.
all familiar with programmatic media, which
Yep.
which really goes after clusters, right? Clusters of people, and they're like-minded people. Moms over 50 who like yoga. Dads who go fishing with their sons. Big clusters of folks. What's happening now as we speak, AI is being used by Google, by Facebook, by all the big guns, for all of our brands to take that from a cluster of individuals to literally an individual, because the amount of data that's coming in to feed that media model is in fact individualized. And
Hmm.
so no longer is, remember mass personalization was like the big hope about, I don't know, a decade or two ago. Now that we have open source, now it's within the realm of today, not even tomorrow, and it's happening on an increasing basis. So that's one way. The other way is, of course, through the funnel. It's not just an awareness trick, but increasingly, as you get into consideration, as you get into purchase, and of course, affinity or loyalty, you can target your consumer at that end as well. So think of it, that purchase funnel, while it's no longer linear, we all know that, it is a good framework to think about your consumer's purchase journey and when and where you can intercept him or her.
Amazing, amazing. So with that said, then companies usually have some sort of like marketing technology stack that's already built in, right?
Yes.
Things like CRM, for example, right, or social media, kinds of tools. What are your thoughts then, as a leader, to say, how do you take what you have and you just integrate it in, or do you just do you start from the beginning again? Do you build or buy?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
It's honestly, you have to build, you have to buy, or you have to borrow, and everyone, it depends where, and probably might end up doing all three, because there are so many tools every day, probably hundreds, if not thousands, of new tools launch. And what I would say in that case is certainly learn about them, but don't let the fox guard the hen house, in that validate it independently. So many times the supplier will offer to validate. Don't fall for that trap. We all know that's the hen guarding the fox guarding the hen house. But I do think it's going to be a mix. I think even the big CPG companies are doing internal proprietary models that are complemented by models through Google, through Meta, and through the big networks. It's not, to me, it's not accidental that in the last 2 weeks, the traditional media companies, New York Times, CBS, et cetera, are laying off, unfortunately, a number of workers, because that traditional model is really being challenged by the big data companies, again, like Google and Facebook. And when you think of Google, as they launched their AI tool, Bard, through Gemini, they can go into all of the suite of Google properties, YouTube inclusive. And so that to me is really exciting when you think about hyper-personalization, because Google and their ad tools knows what YouTube videos you're watching, and what are you searching for, and what travel plans that you're looking on Google Travel. And, it may be a little bit big brother, but again, if you have the permission from the consumer to use that data, it goes to hyper-personalization on a level none of us have ever been able to do before.
That's amazing. And, I don't know if you watched some of the proceedings that happened in the Capitol yesterday around, the senators had invited all these CEOs from social media companies. That's obviously a very hot topic, even at the regulatory level, right? So,
100%.
So for brands who are trying to navigate all this, right? There's on one side, you want to do what's right for the consumer. You want to provide consumer privacy and protection. Then you have the regulators on the other side who are trying to also accomplish pretty much the same thing as well, and of course to provide protection for minors. And that was obviously the conversation yesterday. And any thoughts again? Because I'm sure CEOs are asking their CMOs like, what are your thoughts on this, right? So what would be your advice in this situation?
Yeah, really important. Stewardship, governance, whatever you want to call it, is paramount, and it lands with the C-suite. You cannot delegate that. I can't say it enough. When I think about my biggest learning with AI over these past year, it's both the opportunity for brands, but probably equally, if not more so, the risk to brand trust using these AI tools is massive. And we all know how hard it is to build brand trust over time. It will take one incidence with AI that goes badly, and you will have decades of brand trust that's erased. So that's, to me, why it's so important that the C-suite owns this, the CMO in particular. Yes, we have to be aware of what's happening regulatory, legal, certainly all of the GDPR rules that happen in Europe, privacy here in the States. But AI makes that at a level we've never seen before in terms of risk. And so having a governance board is one really important tool that the C-suite, that part can be delegated, but the CMO needs to meet with them at least monthly to know what they're seeing, working and with IT, as you mentioned before. There's a number of different tools that can happen. Just don't delegate it, and make sure you're thinking through the risk like we do with all risk management at the enterprise level, and have a plan to address it before the risk actually occurs.
That's great. And, you kind of like prompted something else in me, which is that, when we talk about governance and we talk about all these kinds of issues that we're seeing in the press right now, people can easily get cold feet, right? And say, I don't want to touch AI because of that, right? And the risk averseness factor goes up significantly, let's say, right?
Yes.
But then on the other side, on the flip side, we also hear, in the press and, on LinkedIn and all these places that, those companies that are getting AI enabled are going to perform better than those that don't. So there's a tension here that's
for sure.
Right. So what would be your thoughts in terms of, those people who are on the fence or who are super nervous, given all these other conversations that are going on, basically? What would you say to them?
I absolutely understand the nervousness, but from my lens, AI is here. It's happening. None of us have a choice but to understand it, learn it, and use it. I remember when, quote unquote, the internet launched years ago, and I'll be quick on this one, but everyone thought that it was going to replace our jobs or make us have 3-day work weeks. Well, neither of those things happened, and AI is having some of the same conversations. I think I'm on the side that humans will always be needed, and our job is to make sure that our brands and our companies' equities come through and stay true. AI can't think or feel, at least today. It's not sentient yet, and so that still is our job and our responsibility.
Right. So that actually leads to another question, and I know we're past the half-hour mark, but if people can stick around, this is really such an interesting conversation. I don't want to stop it right now. We're like smack in in it right now. So, not everybody's going to have the same level of understanding and knowledge, right? You started off the conversation by saying, "Hey, I'm not the expert here," and I said, like, none of us are, right? But there are people who are, there's already a diversity of experience levels, even in the last 12, 18 months around AI, right? So from a talent perspective, especially a marketing talent perspective, what would you advise CMOs to do in that context?
I think that's going to be one of the hottest topics for this year, if not beyond. But first, yet again, we have to say we as CMOs know the least, not the most. And not every CMO, that's not a very comfortable thing to say, but it's absolutely true as it comes to AI.
Yeah.
Second is to really start to understand the different talent that's emerging from AI, like prompt engineers. Getting your prompt right is everything, in AI. And so if we don't understand even how that prompt architecture works, then, it's not just, you can't just say, okay, marketers, go use AI. You have to teach them and prioritize that training on, okay, how do you architect a prompt, and how do you validate that it's correct? So I don't have the answer. I don't think anyone does in terms of talent, but I think continuing to learn and watch how the space is evolving, and have conversations like this, and not be afraid to say, I don't know, because most of us don't, but I think together we can learn.
Well, it's funny you started by saying that the CMOs may and people with our level of experience may or may not know enough about this. I teach at the University of South Carolina. I tell my students the same exact things, and that, look, you're already playing with AI, and you probably know more than your leaders will know. So you're actually if you get hired, you will actually be able to educate and train them, and almost reverse mentor your leaders around this particular point. And you shouldn't 100%. Be afraid of doing that. And I think CMOs and marketing leaders should embrace new hires coming in who actually know more about this space than we do, kind of thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. Just this morning, the CEO of TikTok said they're behind in AI.
Wow.
CEO of TikTok. I mean, that was mind blowing to me. So yes, I think that's just case in point for what you said.
Amazing. That's absolutely amazing. So a couple of last questions. So, we talked a lot about, the strategy part. We talked about the use cases. We talked about the governance. We talked about the framework. The talent piece of it, but and decision making of obviously as a C-suite leader. But when it comes to implementation and when it comes to measurement of success, could you just speak to what would be the 2 or 3 things that would be top of mind for you?
Sure. First of all, the fundamentals of everything we're talking about have not changed. The fundamentals of marketing haven't changed. The fundamentals of measurement haven't changed. So
Yeah.
I would measure ROI in general the same way I always do, right? Cost over
Yeah.
benefit, and see if that is working. But I would also make sure that the KPI is aligned to the objective, because sometimes ROI is the wrong KPI. And I think we all got drunk on ROAS a little bit, as being the ultimate measure in terms of digital marketing. Well,
Yeah.
it depends. If your objective is to attract more eyeballs and educate them, then
Mhm.
ROAS may not be the right measurement. And I think the same is going to be true with AI. We really have to think and match that and work with our market research partners like yourself to
Mhm.
see what is in fact the best measurement, what's the best ROI, or excuse me, KPI,
Yeah.
and is it worth spending money to measure versus just going to get qualitative learning? Because sometimes that's as powerful.
Amazing, amazing. So when you go down that pathway, for me that's actually a bit of a reassurance. If I'm a leader, a marketing leader, to say that, hey, this is not actually that difficult in terms of how I think already, right? Because we've been
Correct.
doing this for years and years, so we know how to do that, right? It's
Correct.
just a new tool. It's a question of how do you get your talent to embrace it. It's about where do you fit it into your
Exactly.
organization, and how do you then basically manage it, in that sense. Are you getting a
Exactly.
sense? Are you getting a sense where that companies have to redo their work streams because of AI tools, or are you thinking that this is going to be like a bolt-on to existing processes? Do you have a sense for that just yet, or not yet?
I actually think our work processes are going to be enabled by AI too.
Okay.
Um, and I mean, there's tools now that if you use it, the plugins, there's one called Guide. I was just
Yeah.
playing around with yesterday. It will literally, if you tell it your process, it
Yeah.
will capture it. It
Yeah.
will create a video, a training video for that process that you can use in onboarding. I mean, that's unbelievable. So I
Wow.
do think our processes will change a little, but I think they're going to be enabled by AI too. Everything.
Amazing, amazing. So I think, as we've gone through this conversation, right? For me, the big takeaway is, if you haven't started already, you're given a great, like roadmap for how you can start within the marketing function. I think that's, one big key takeaway for me. But those who have already started, like, how can they stay ahead of the curve? What would be your recommendations for that group of people who are already,
Yeah.
in the AI space?
I
Yeah.
would love everyone's recommendation too, but LinkedIn alone is a wonderful resource. There are thousands of AI experts on LinkedIn that you can follow, which I do, and I would recommend. Many of them have their own newsletters that you can get every single day, which I do, and I would recommend.
Mhm.
There are numerous free trainings. Google offers many, Coursera offers many, etc., that you can just start to do. And they're
Mhm.
anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. They don't have to be, super in depth, but just keeping curious. There's podcasts that talk about it. Scott
Mhm.
Galloway and Cara Fisher is one of my favorite. Pivot.
Mhm.
So I think the more that you can soak in, the more you're going to be able to apply it to your business, just like any other topic. But it does take prioritization, and curiosity.
No, that's amazing. So, any like, like last, tips that you would give people, like, in terms of, if you were to join a new company today as the CMO of a company, and you're coming in, they're all looking at you as a new leader. They haven't touched AI yet, let's say, or let's assume for a moment, right? What would be like the first 1 or 2 or 3 things that you would want people to hear from you as a marketing leader?
Yeah, I think we are at the beginning of a tipping point where AI is either going to be used as a force for good and growth,
Yeah.
or a force for not. And I see the opportunity, as we've been talking, better consumer understanding, better, we haven't even talked retailers, but there's a ton of tools with retailers, all of our stakeholders, employee satisfaction, training, development, there's tools and AI for all of that. So I would challenge our organization to say, how together can we create AI as a force for growth and a force for good?
Yeah.
And start to prioritize a few use cases to go after that.
Amazing, amazing. Charlene, this has been a phenomenal conversation. I can't thank you enough for joining me today. I learned a lot. I hope our audience learned a lot as well.
Thank you for the invite. This was great.
This is amazing. No, thank you for that. And for those who are on listening into this conversation, feel free to reach out to Charlene or me. If you have additional questions, you can obviously drop questions in the comments, and we'll be going back and looking at this. Not just today, but even over the next coming days as well. If you have any additional questions, this show that we started, or rather I started, basically is intended to help educate people, and bring that kind of awareness around what AI is doing in the marketing realm, basically. So in 2 weeks' time, on February 15th, same time, we have David Boyle joining us. He's written the book on prompt engineering, actually.
Oh, amazing.
So when you mentioned about learning about prompts as a leader, I was kind of smiling ear to ear, because I was you've literally teed up David for the next conversation that I'm having. So
I'll be there.
If anybody wants to join, you're welcome to join us for that as well. So thank you again, everybody, and see you guys soon.
Thanks, Yogesh. Thank you, everyone.